I don't make threats. I make promises, and I always keep them. Hi, my name is Alice Michelle. I'm 32, a contractor from Boston. I built my company from nothing but steel beams and stubborn grit. For years, my family treated me like their private bank account. They drained me dry, then smiled across Sunday dinners as if love was just another invoice waiting for my signature. At the lawyer's office, their mask finally slipped. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of their legacy, gone to Derek. My name didn't even stain the will. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. That was the moment I became their reckoning. Before I take you back to where it all began, subscribe now. Because betrayal may be written in ink, but revenge is carved in stone. I grew up in a quiet Boston suburb that hid loud truths. From the sidewalk, we looked like a postcard family. Inside, love tilted toward my brother and never rebalanced. I was the checklist child. Grades, chores, quiet reliability. Derek was the headline. Charm, trouble, then another second chance. Attention gathered around him like moths finding their porch light. At my high school graduation, I was valedictorian and exhausted. We took photos, ate Applebee's, and called it a celebration. A $50 card slid across the table, polite and distant. 2 weeks later, Derek won regionals and fireworks appeared. Backyard crowded, cousins cheering. A new console wrapped in silver. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the enthusiasm. My achievements were noted. His were paraded until midnight. College separated the story into 2 columns. Despite my scholarship, I still owed more than I had. I worked mornings at a coffee shop that smelled like possibility. Evenings shelving books at the library, whispering with tired students. Weekends swinging hammers for my uncle, blisters singing through gloves. I learned spreadsheets at 2 a.m. and ceilings at 6. I learned that hunger becomes fuel when no one feeds you. Derek attended a private university with mediocre grades and confidence. Tuition, housing, meal plan, even spending money, covered without hesitation. When I asked why, my father smiled with weary logic. Derek isn't as independent as you, Alice. He needs support. The sentence landed like a door locking from the outside. Independence became the reason they withheld what I'd earned. Care was recast as convenience. My strength excused their favoritism. Sunday dinners kept the script running year after year. Derek's newest venture filled the air like commercial breaks. My wins arrived last, then disappeared with the dishes. I drove home measuring silence by streetlights and steering wheel. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. I didn't need their money, I needed their fairness, and never got it. I built Michelle Contracting from leftovers and stubborn mornings. The first office was a sublease above a bait shop. Dust drifted through blinds like slow snow I couldn't afford. I slept on a mattress rolled behind filing cabinets. 80-hour weeks blurred into invoices, ladders, and borrowed coffee. I learned to read blueprints and people with equal care. My hands toughened, but I kept a soft ledger. Every dollar back into tools, crew, insurance, and one truck. Birthdays were punch lists, vacations were postponed deliveries. Meanwhile, Derek discovered a new purpose every season. He floated between jobs like a helium balloon losing air. Then he wanted a sports memorabilia store, shiny and certain. My parents remortgaged their house to fund his grand opening. $75,000, plus the kind of praise I never tasted. The shop died in 8 months. Excuses stacked higher than shelves. They called it bad timing, not bad habits. When my father's chest tightened, I answered without counting. $32,000 for surgery and weeks of recovery. I delayed equipment upgrades and slept in the office again. Gratitude came, but expectations stayed, humming like a generator. Sunday dinners kept staging Derek as the centerpiece. I brought roles. He brought promises wrapped in optimism. My updates were nice. His ideas were visionary, brave, destined. Sometimes love is applause. Sometimes it's an unpaid invoice. I drove home rehearsing conversations I never dared to start. The mortgage problem arrived dressed as a confession. Property taxes are climbing, my mother sighed over dishes. I set an automatic transfer, $2,800 every month. No contract, no timeline, just blood and a routing number. I told myself it was temporary and responsible. I told myself I was protecting our home and theirs. I told myself fairness would meet me at the finish. At night, I audited my life by hallway light. Spreadsheets glowed, and so did the questions I ignored. Was I helping or training them to need me? Was duty just another name for being useful? Work expanded, and so did our bids and crews. We finished a school gym, 3 kitchens, and a clinic. Clients shook my hand like I'd poured the slabs myself. I began to believe effort would buy me peace. Estate planning would be the ledger finally balancing. If you've been through this, you're not alone. You can love people and still be emptied by them. You can be generous and still be quietly erased. I kept paying, kept building, kept hoping the math worked. On a Friday, the attorney called for a meeting. I packed plans, wore my best shirt, and exhaled. Some doors opened to fairness, others opened to fire. I walked toward that conference room believing I'd be seen. The conference room smelled of polish and distance. Mahogany table. Neutral art. No warmth, no welcome. My parents sat stiff, Derek smoothing his expensive watch. The attorney shuffled papers, clearing his throat like thunder. "Alice," he said, "your parents made their wishes clear. Every asset, house, accounts, insurance, would pass to Derek alone. For me? A recipe book and baseball cards." The air folded in half. My pulse echoed. I looked at my father. His voice cracked. "You're successful. You've built a business. Derek needs more security." My mother added, brittle and bright, "You've always been so good at taking care of yourself." Those words sliced deeper than any mortgage. Strength had become my punishment, success my disqualification. The attorney kept listing numbers like they weren't mine already. 650,000 in property, 180,000 in investments, insurance totaling 300,000. Then the hidden bomb, a new mortgage. 275,000, payments 2,800 monthly. The same amount I had been transferring each month. They hadn't needed help with taxes. They had borrowed against a debt-free house to fund Derek. "An upscale sports bar," my mother announced proudly. "Great location, very promising." My stomach turned. I knew that script by heart. "And you expect me to keep covering those payments?" My father's throat cleared, eyes fixed on the table. "We would appreciate your continued support during this transition." Support? They had rebranded Betrayal as gratitude. They had weaponized my love into their business plan. Derek finally spoke, rolling his eyes like I was dramatic. "It's not like you need their money." The sentence landed like glass shattering in my chest. Every sacrifice, every transfer erased as if it never mattered. They didn't see me. They saw an ATM with lungs. I stood slowly, jacket on my arm, voice flat. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Wilson." My parents called after me, desperate and commanding. "Sunday dinner," they said. "Family discussion," they said. But family had left the room long before I did. The elevator hummed me downward while my phone buzzed. Texts from my mother, my father, Derek's silence. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. This wasn't grief for money. It was grief for recognition that never arrived. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears your last name and smiles. That day I stopped being their provider and started being their reckoning. I drove home and canceled every transfer without trembling. 2 clicks, and the pipeline to their plans ran dry. My mother texted, "Mortgage is due." I replied, "Not mine," then silenced the thread. At 9:17 a.m., calls stacked like falling bricks. From Dad, "Call immediately. This is unacceptable." From Mom, "Bank error? Please fix before 5. From Derek, "Nothing, just entitlement humming in absence." I opened a clean spreadsheet and built a ledger. Line by line, I wrote my history in numbers. Derek's tuition support, 14,000. Dad's surgery and aftercare, 32,475. Home repairs, roof, plumbing, electrical, 20,050. Emergency bailouts, almost 15,000 scattered like broken promises. Monthly transfers across years, 90,000 and change. Total, over 175,000 not including sleep. I called Margaret, my financial advisor, and locked down assets. Retainers paid. Accounts insulated. Personal and business clearly ring-fenced. I called Sarah, an attorney friend, and described the harassment. "Document everything," she said. "Consider a restraining order if needed." Then I called my parents from my office phone. "Transfers are canceled," I said. "Boundaries are in place." Dad's answer arrived sharp as a slammed door. "This childish behavior stops now. You have responsibilities." "I already fulfilled them 10 times over," I said. I listed the totals. He called them exaggerations. Gaslighting tried to rewrite math. Math refused to move. The campaign escalated sideways and below the belt. My mother phoned colleagues, hinting I was unstable, overspent, overwhelmed. Michael from another firm warned me over beers. She asked if stress made you irrational. He said. They weaponized worry to corrode my credibility at work. They didn't realize I'd already welded my reputation in steel. I drafted a concise timeline with receipts and statements. I shared it selectively with the extended family. Aunt Emma read it twice, then called everyone else. Narrative corrected, she texted me, a one-woman newsroom. Cousins stopped parroting pity and started asking hard questions. Without secrecy, manipulation withered under plain daylight. Meanwhile, the mortgage clock kept its indifferent rhythm. 2 missed payments triggered formal bank notices. Derek's sports bar sputtered on half-empty nights. He took a part-time job and tasted consequence. My parents ambushed me at a job site. Tears, threats, guilt, the entire family repertoire spilled out. I didn't perform this time. I set a boundary. Leave my workplace or I call security, I said. They left, stunned by the door that finally closed. That evening, I printed the ledger and signed it. Notarized truth, stamped and dated, for the inevitable narrative war. I folded fear into a small, silent square. Then I filed it where I keep unprofitable tools. Have you ever faced coordinated guilt dressed as concern? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone here. I slept through the first quiet night in years. Silence didn't accuse me. Silence congratulated me for staying. I had stopped their pipeline and started rebuilding my life on bedrock. Months passed before their letters replaced shouting. My father's handwriting, rigid and careful, filled a white page. He admitted what I had carried, what they had ignored. For years, we expected too much and gave too little. Your anger is justified. We are sorry. For the first time, apology arrived without an invoice attached. They sold the house, downsized, and learned to budget. My mother took a modest job at an elementary school. My father consulted part-time, humbled and quieter. Derek tasted failure, then structure, and finally responsibility. Life forced them into the adulthood they had delayed. I didn't rush forgiveness. I let it arrive slowly, like cautious spring after bitter winters. Coffee with Dad became weekly. My mother learned how to ask, not demand. Derek admitted jealousy, resentment, and the truth of entitlement. Meanwhile, I built more than contracts and payrolls. I built a life with Lucas, steady and sincere. He loved me for myself, not for what I carried. Our wedding was small, honest, and unburdened. My parents attended, not as creditors, but as family. Forgiveness didn't erase boundaries. It planted them firmly, visible, respected. I chose to give a down payment for their condo. Not duty, not obligation, but a gift I wanted to give. This time, gratitude replaced entitlement. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. If you have, you're not alone. The lesson carved itself deep. Strength isn't punishment, and love isn't a balance sheet. I am not valuable because I provide. I am valuable because I am here. I walked away as their provider, and returned as myself, unshaken. Before saying goodbye, if this story touched your heart, please give it a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayal stories. That reminds us we are stronger than we think.
It's been 6 months since I moved to Oregon, and not a single call, text, or email from my parents. Not a question about where I'd gone, or why my apartment lease ended, or why the birthday card they mailed never reached me. Not that they remembered my birthday anyway. I still remember that last day in Arlington. The sun was unseasonably hot for March, and sweat trickled down my back as I taped the final boxes shut. Jasper hoisted a crate of kitchen supplies with a grunt, while Ray folded down the flaps on my suitcase with her knee. My one-bedroom apartment was mostly empty by then, just stacks of cardboard and the second-hand armchair I didn't bother to sell. "Are you sure you're not going to tell them?" Ray asked, wiping her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I mean, just a text or something I looked up from where I was labeling a box bedroom. Donate. They haven't asked where I live in 3 years. Why would I tell them I'm leaving?" She didn't argue. She just exchanged a look with Jasper, who muttered, "Still wild to me." It wasn't wild to me. It was normal, expected. I'd been the extra in their family portrait for as long as I could remember. Quiet, invisible, acceptable only when useful. Callum was the sun, the center, the reason the camera flashed. I was background. The U-Haul we'd rented creaked as we loaded in the final box. I shut the door with both hands, pressed my palms against the metal until it clicked. Then I stood there for a moment, staring at the place I'd called home for almost a decade. Not because it held memories, but because it held silence. "Ready?" Jasper asked, swinging the keys around his finger. I nodded. More than ready. The drive to Ashland was long and quiet. I watched the landscape shift outside the window from city grit to redwoods, from crowded to clear. By the time we hit Oregon, something in me had already begun to loosen. My new apartment was nothing special. One bedroom, slightly outdated kitchen, a narrow balcony overlooking the trees, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I hung my own photos, set up my desk exactly the way I liked it, cooked real dinners without anyone interrupting or ignoring me. I got up early, logged into work, watered the herbs in the kitchen window. Jasper and Ray visited every other weekend. Edith, my grandmother, called every week without fail. No one else called. That was the part that made me laugh some nights, not bitter laughter, but the kind that sounds hollow in an empty room. I had vanished, and no one even blinked. Not until last week. When the phone rang and the name lit up, I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it. Theodore Rhodes, like it belonged to a different life. I picked up on the fourth ring. His voice came through, clipped, irritated. "You need to come home next weekend." I should have known what that call meant. The flatness in his tone wasn't disappointment or confusion, it was entitlement. I was being summoned. And not for my sake. I didn't ask for details. I told him I had plans and hung up before he could begin his usual follow-up lecture. Then I sat back at my desk, stared out at the pine-covered ridge behind my apartment, and felt that old weight settle over me. Not sadness, just recognition. This was how it had always been. When I was 8, I made honor roll for the 3rd time in a row. I laid the report card neatly on the kitchen table, where I knew my mother would sit down with her tea. She glanced at it once and said, "Good job, honey," without looking up from her phone. That same week, Callum got a C+ on a math quiz and still got to pick dinner. The year I won first place in the regional science fair, I came home holding a trophy half my height. My teacher had pulled me aside that morning and said I should be proud. I was. I wanted them to be too. At dinner, I placed the trophy on the counter. My father said, "Let's not make a big deal out of it, Delaney. Your brother has finals." That was the year I stopped bringing awards home. By the time I turned 17, I knew I'd be paying for college myself. I got into a state school with a scholarship, picked up 2 part-time jobs, and stopped coming home for breaks. It was easier that way. Cleaner. I graduated early, moved into a shared apartment, took whatever freelance work I could find. My resume grew faster than my social life, but I didn't mind. Work was something I could control. Work didn't forget me at the dinner table. Eventually, I landed a job with a cybersecurity firm based in Seattle. Remote, flexible hours, full benefits. I'd been there almost 3 years now. My boss said I had a knack for untangling the chaos that other engineers overlooked. My savings account had commas in it. My fridge had real food. My inbox had a pre-approval letter from a mortgage broker. I was 29 years old and finally thinking about buying a house. Nothing big, just mine. So when my father's voice tried to pull me back into obligation, into performances dressed as family duties, I didn't flinch. I just let the silence stretch long enough to make it clear I wasn't coming. "You need to come home next weekend." That was the first thing he said. Not hello, not how have you been. Just a directive delivered like I was still 18 and waiting for permission to breathe. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Why? There was a pause. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes through the phone. "Your brother's engagement dinner. Isla's parents want to meet the whole family. They're very traditional. Of course. Not a reunion, not a reconnection. Just another image to maintain. A daughter-shaped placeholder at the table to round out the illusion of family. I won't be there." Another pause. Sharper this time. "What do you mean you won't be there?" "I mean exactly that," I said. "I have other plans. Delaney, this is important for your brother's future. They're high-profile people. It'll reflect badly on us if you don't show up." There it was. Us. Not me. Not how I was doing or where I'd been. Just the optics. "I moved to Oregon 6 months ago." I said, my voice steady. "I'm not flying across the country for a dinner I wasn't even invited to until now." Silence. The kind that isn't quiet at all, but charged like air before a storm. "You moved to Oregon without telling us you didn't know where I was before. Why would this be different?" His voice dropped low and tight. "How dare you move without telling your family?" "What's your address?" I almost laughed. "Do you even remember my last one?" He didn't answer right away. And that told me everything. That's not the point. It's exactly the point I said. You're not asking because you care. You're asking because now it's inconvenient not to know. Delaney, this isn't how families work. No, I said, but it's how ours always has. I hung up. My hand didn't even shake. For a moment, I just sat there letting the silence rush back in. Then the screen lit up again. Missed call, then another, then a text, from him, from my mother, then Callum. I didn't answer any of them. I just turned off my phone, made myself tea, and stood on the balcony watching the light drain from the sky. By the next morning, the texts had turned from reminders into guilt, and from guilt into threats. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 voicemails, 11 texts, and 2 emails with subject lines like, "Can we talk and family should stick together?" My mother finally called. Her voice was tight with restraint, like she was trying to sound warm without dropping the script. "Sweetheart, this isn't like you. You've always been so respectful. Your brother's counting on you. Isla's parents are formal people. We need to show unity." Unity. A word that means nothing when it's only summoned for guests. "I'm not going," I said simply. "Delaney, don't be difficult." "I'm not." "I'm being honest." She sighed, frustrated. "It's just one dinner. You don't have to stay long. Smile, say a few words, and then you can disappear again if that's what you want." "You mean like I already have?" Another silence. Then she hung up. Callum tried next. His tone was different, less forceful, more confused. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad, but can't you just show up?" For me, I almost felt something. Almost. But I remembered all the years he looked away while I was overlooked. "No," I said. "Not this time." The next day, my father called again. His voice had shed the pretense. "If you don't show up to this wedding," he said, "you're out of the will." I let the silence stretch just long enough to give him hope I was weighing it. Then I said calmly, clearly, "I make more money than all of you combined." I could hear him inhale like he'd been slapped. "You're bluffing. If you'd ever asked about my life, I said you'd know I'm not." He didn't respond. He just hung up. That was the last call I took. From that point on, I watched the messages come in like waves, first urgent, then desperate, then angry again. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened a new tab on my laptop and clicked back to the real estate listing I'd saved the week before. It was still there. 3 bedrooms, cedar siding, room for a garden. Grandma Edith called the next morning just as the sky turned pink behind the trees. She never waited for permission, never checked if I was free. She just called, and I always answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice steady with that mix of gentleness and knowing. "How's the air up there today?" "Cool and quiet," I said. "Like I like it." We talked for a few minutes about the lavender I'd planted on the balcony, about the deer that sometimes wandered behind the apartment. Then she paused. "They asked me to call you?" She said, not apologizing, just stating the fact. "I figured," I said. "Let me guess. Convince me to come back and play the part." They didn't use those words, but yes, she said. "Your mother's been pacing. Your father's in a mood. They're panicking. Because they miss me." She hesitated just long enough. "Because Isla's parents are watching and asking questions." I laughed under my breath. Of course. My value had finally surfaced tied neatly to someone else's expectations. "I'm not going, Grandma," I know she said. I wouldn't either. That's why I always picked up. She didn't sugarcoat things. She didn't make excuses for them or pretend the past hadn't happened. She remembered my birthdays, sent me postcards from her little trips, asked about my job, and actually listened to the answers. She was the only one who ever looked directly at me and saw more than what I could offer. "I just wanted you to hear it from someone honest," she said. "Not because I think you owe them anything." "Thank you," I said. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said, and I meant it. Really. I stayed on the phone with her until the tea in my mug went cold. She asked about the house I was looking at and whether I planned to paint the walls or leave them plain. We talked about furniture and fig trees and things that had nothing to do with obligation. By the time we said goodbye, the sun was warming the windows, and I had already opened the mortgage calculator again. The wedding day came and went without me. I spent the morning on a trail just outside Lithia Park, weaving between tall trees and early spring wildflowers. The silence out there wasn't empty, it was earned. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what was happening on the other side of the country. I breathed deeply, let the wind move around me, and kept walking. When I got home that evening, there was a missed call from Grandma Edith. I called her back before even taking off my boots. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "You enjoying your mountain air every second?" She exhaled slowly. "Well, the wedding happened." I waited. "It was tense," she said. "The kind of tension that looks polite on the outside but makes your neck stiff just sitting in the same room. Sounds familiar?" She chuckled. "Your parents did their best to keep it together, but Mira couldn't stop fidgeting. Your father barely spoke. Isla's mother kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone." "Me?" "Yes." "And when she realized you weren't coming, she asked why." I closed my eyes, let the moment land. "What did they say?" "They tried different versions. First, they said you were sick. Then, that work had called you away. Then, that you were traveling for some conference. All lies. Isla's mother knew it. You could see it in her face. She pressed harder. Asked why you hadn't been at the engagement party either. Asked why she only found out you existed a few weeks ago. And, apparently, she had a private conversation with your mother after the rehearsal dinner. No one knows exactly what was said, but your mother came out of it pale and quiet. I think she got read like a book." I almost smiled. "What about Callum?" "He looked distracted all night, kept checking the door, never smiled long." Isla looked upset through most of the ceremony. I don't think she bought the family portrait they were trying to paint. I sat down at the kitchen table, letting that sink in. Not out of malice, just at the kind of satisfaction that comes from truth finally catching up to the noise. "They still think this is about a dinner party," I said. "I know," she replied. "But Isla's parents saw it Delaney. The imbalance, the omissions, the damage." We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and scrolled through new listings. The house I'd been eyeing was still available. I bookmarked it again just in case. A week after the wedding, Grandma Edith called again. I was in the middle of unpacking a box labeled kitchen, fragile, when the phone lit up with her name. "They're still talking about it," she said without needing to explain what it was. "Isla's parents, yes. They've asked Callum directly now. Why you weren't involved. Why no one mentioned you until the last minute. Why you've disappeared. And what did he say?" He tried to downplay it at first, but I think even he's starting to realize it's not just going away. Isla's mother doesn't like being lied to. I set down a stack of plates and leaned against the counter. Is the marriage already cracking? There's tension, the kind that doesn't fade with a honeymoon. I didn't feel glee. I didn't want things to fall apart for him. I just felt still, like watching ripples in a pond after dropping a single stone. "They've started asking around," Grandma said. "Your parents, wanting to know who might have your new number, your address. They even asked me again. You didn't tell them, right? Of course not." "I told them if you wanted to talk to them, you would." I breathed out slowly. "Thank you." "They're nervous," she continued. "Not just about you, about what Isla's parents might do, what they might say, what this might mean for Callum's future. They're worried about damage control," I said. "Not about me." "Yes," she said quietly, "but they're starting to realize this doesn't just disappear. The way they treated you, it left marks." I looked around the small kitchen sunlight on the counters, new dish towels folded by the sink, a window above the stove that overlooked a row of pines. This wasn't just where I lived, it was mine. "They're the ones who disappeared," I said. "They just didn't notice until someone else did." She didn't reply right away, but I could hear the pride in her silence, the kind that never had to be spoken out loud. That night, I finished unpacking the kitchen and lit a candle by the sink. The house already felt like home. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's blocky, careful print, like he thought neatness could cover history. I stood at the mailbox for a long moment, the envelope heavy despite its weight. I didn't bring it inside. I walked straight to the fire pit in the backyard, struck a match, and dropped it in. The paper curled inward, blackened, then disappeared into ash. I already knew how it ended. The next morning, I signed the final paperwork for the house. My name on every line, no cosigner, no conditions. Just mine. Jasper and Ray texted about flights for next month. They wanted to see the place and help me plant the first flowers. I'd already cleared a corner of the yard for tomatoes and thyme. Later that evening, I registered for a graduate course in digital forensics. Not because I needed it, just because I could. I changed my phone number the same week. Only a handful of people got the new one. Edith, my boss, Jasper, Ray. That was enough. No more surprise calls. No more texts asking for favors disguised as obligations. No more family dinners where my name was an afterthought. The house was quiet. Not lonely, just honest. 6 months later, my backyard was filled with voices and the smell of roasted corn and grilled peaches. Jasper was manning the grill like it was a science experiment. Ray balanced a pitcher of sangria in one hand and a stack of mismatched cups in the other. The folding table overflowed with potluck dishes, quiche sesame noodles, a suspicious-looking casserole someone insisted was a family recipe. A neighbor's golden retriever flopped at my feet. Across the yard, my coworker's daughter Marin tugged at my sleeve and handed me a plastic bracelet she'd made from string. "You're my aunt now," she said solemnly. "But the fun kind." "I'll take that," I said, slipping it on. Later, as twilight settled in, someone I barely knew from the next street over asked, "Do you have family back east?" I didn't hesitate, not anymore. There was a beat of quiet, and then I smiled, gesturing to the table where Jasper was laughing so hard he'd spilled lemonade on his shirt, where Ray was dancing barefoot to a playlist I didn't even know I had. "But I have this." And I meant it. When everyone had left and the yard was quiet again, I gathered the plates, folded the chairs, and stood at the edge of the garden with the string bracelet still on my wrist. Fireflies blinked near the fence. My house glowed softly behind me. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was mine. He said it like he was ordering takeout. No hesitation, no shame. 80% for Rail's future. 20% for your father. It's that simple. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking clock and the slow drip of the faucet I'd asked him to fix 3 months ago. Tomas leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach like a king settling debts. Rail was somewhere down the hall, probably in bed. Headphones on, scrolling through shoes he couldn't afford, at least not on the money he made himself. I looked at my father. Same stained t-shirt, same expectant smirk. I stirred my coffee and said nothing for a long moment. He thought I was calculating, that I'd protest, maybe bargain. Instead, I laughed. It came out sharp, sudden, even surprised me. He blinked. What's funny, I wiped the corner of my eye. "Nothing I said, only that I've been giving you both the best of me for years. My time, my money, my silence. And now you think you can divide me like a grocery list." Thomas sat up. "We're family. Your brother needs to go to school. I need to keep this house running. It's not that complicated, Isela. You have more than enough." "No," I said and stood. "You have had more than enough. Of me." I picked up my cup and walked toward my room. Behind me, his voice followed. "You're being dramatic." I didn't answer. I didn't owe him the performance. In my room, I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Not because I was leaving tonight, but because something had shifted. Not a flare of rage, but something colder, steadier. The kind of feeling that doesn't burn out. The kind that turns into movement. I zipped it shut and left it by the door. I knew then that the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about staying. It would be about remembering when exactly I stopped asking permission to leave. The night my mother left, she promised it was temporary. She stood by the front door with a rolling suitcase, hair pulled tight, voice even tighter. "Just for a few months, mija. I'll send money. We'll get ahead." She kissed my cheek like it was a favor and not a goodbye. I was 14. Rael was 9. Thomas didn't even walk her out. Just stayed on the couch flipping channels like none of it mattered. A few months became a year, then 5. Then we stopped marking the calendar. By the time I was 16, I knew how to cook Rail's favorite breakfast, fill out his school forms, check for fevers, and keep the lights from being shut off. Thomas would call it stepping up, but it felt more like getting dragged forward while everyone else stepped back. He stopped working not long after Mom left. Said his back hurt. Then it was his knees. Then it was, why should I bust my ass when your mother sends money? Eventually, even the remittances slowed, and still he didn't move. At 18, I got a job folding clothes at a department store. First paycheck. Thomas held out his hand and said, "We're a team here." I gave it over. Rent, groceries, cable, beer, whatever kept the house upright, and him sitting down. Rail, he was the golden one, the creative one. Always needing the newest headphones, phone upgrades, shoes that cost more than my weekly hours. I tried asking Tomas if maybe Rail should contribute too. He chuckled and cracked open a beer. "Let your brother live. You already had your chance." I didn't know what he meant by that. My chance at what Sleep College silenced the house was small. Our walls were paper thin. I heard everything Rail sneaking in late Tomas talking about me like I was some stern wife instead of his daughter, like my discipline was a flaw instead of the only reason we weren't buried in debt. I remember once standing in the hallway with a wet towel in my hands, listening to them laugh over something stupid. I felt like a ghost, still warm, still moving, but completely invisible. And even then, I stayed, because I thought that's what family meant. You hold the roof up no matter how hard it leans on you, but maybe I was never holding it up. Maybe I was just keeping myself under it, waiting for it to fall. That suitcase by the door. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a signal, and the next day I'd hear something that made the decision even clearer. I never meant to stay at the job that long. It started as a way out any out. Entry-level inventory assistant at a food logistics company. I showed up early, stayed late, said thank you more than I needed to. 5 years in, I'd worked my way to logistics lead, then supervisor. By the 7th year, I was overseeing regional shipments and managing people who used to call me kid. The raises came in steady steps. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. But the money added up, and still I never told anyone at home. Every payday I withdrew the same amount I made back when I was 19. I handed it to Tomas in a plain envelope and let him believe that was all there was. He'd nod sometimes, grunt a thank you if he was in a decent mood. Rail never asked where I worked. I don't think he even knew the name of the company. I opened a separate savings account under a different bank, a different login one Thomas couldn't guess. It was small at first, a few hundred, then a few thousand. I watched the numbers rise the way some people watch the tide. At home, nothing changed. Same cracked tile, same second-hand couch, same empty promises. I started using words like overtime and cut hours when I needed space, and they never questioned it. Maybe they didn't care enough to. I ate lunch alone most days, but on a rare break, I ran into Amara from HR. We used to work the floor together before she moved up. She smiled when she saw me. Still surviving, she joked. More or less. She leaned in more serious now. You always had a good head. But girl, you carry that family like it's a cross. I didn't answer, just chewed slower. She watched me for a second. Then, you know love isn't supposed to feel like servitude. I laughed because that's what I do when things hit too deep. But it stayed with me. On the drive home, while folding laundry, while pretending not to hear Rail through the wall, asking for another $40 for something important. That night, I transferred more into the savings account. It wasn't just money I was collecting. It was options. And a few weeks later, when I accidentally left something on my desk, those options would be exposed faster than I was ready for. It was a mistake, a small one I wouldn't usually make. I'd printed a recent pay stub for a bank verification, left it on my desk instead of sliding it into the usual folder under my mattress. I told myself I'd file it that night, but I got home late, tossed my bag on the bed, and forgot. The next day, Rail was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, face flushed with something between rage and disbelief. "This what they pay you," he said, waving the paper like it was evidence of a crime. I didn't answer. He already knew. "So you've been hoarding while we struggle?" His voice cracked like he couldn't decide if he wanted to cry or scream. I stepped past him. "That's none of your business." He followed me. You live here, don't you? You eat our food, sit on our couch, and you've been sitting on money." Before I could speak again, Thomas was at the kitchen table reading the stub himself. His eyes narrowed. "This real?" he asked. I nodded once. He slammed his hand down. "You selfish girl. Rail wants college. I need help keeping this house up. And you're stacking cash while pretending we're scraping by." "You never asked," I said quietly. "You just assumed I'd stay broke for your convenience." Thomas stood chest-puffed like it used to mean something. "Well, now it changes. From now on, 80% of that goes to Rail. He's got dreams, a future, and the other 20% I've earned that, for keeping this family together." The silence in the room was heavy like a lid closing on something hot. I looked at Rail. He didn't flinch. He actually looked proud. That's when it happened. Not anger, not fear, just stillness, like a clock stopping. Something inside me went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that keeps the peace, the kind that builds walls. I didn't argue, didn't yell, just walked to my room and shut the door. If they thought money was control, they were about to learn what happens when the one holding the roof up finally lets go. And the next morning, I opened the closet and pulled the suitcase all the way out. I packed slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel every fold, every click of the suitcase zipper. I wasn't just filling a bag, I was naming what was mine. Clothes I'd bought on clearance, a chipped mug from my first promotion, the journal no one knew I kept. I didn't take much, just enough to live. The rest I left behind, worn-out blankets, hand-me-down guilt, the stories they told about who I was supposed to be. By midnight, the house was still. Rail's door was shut. Thomas had passed out on the couch, the TV flashing blue light across his face. I slipped the old keys from my ring and placed them on the kitchen counter. No note, no farewell. I was almost to the door when he stirred. His eyes opened, then narrowed. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" I didn't stop walking. He sat up. "You're abandoning your family." That word again. Family, like it was supposed to tether me. I turned the knob, then looked at him over my shoulder. "No. I'm releasing myself from the idea that I ever had one." He stood unsteady but angry. "You'll come crawling back. Don't think we'll be here waiting." I didn't answer. The air outside was cool, not dramatic. No storm, no sirens, just the soft thud of my boots on the driveway and the night breathing steady around me. I drove to the small studio I'd already paid first and last month's rent for, a quiet corner unit above a shuttered bakery. The stairs creaked and the walls needed paint, but the space was mine. I set my suitcase down, sat on the floor, and leaned against the wall. No one yelling from the other room, no one asking where the money was. Just silence. Not the kind I used to fear, but the kind that finally gave me room to hear myself think. The next morning, I bought a real mattress. Nothing fancy, just one that didn't sag in the middle. I made coffee in a cheap drip machine and drank it on the floor. It tasted like something I hadn't known I missed. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without waking once. And 3 months later, when the phone rang close to midnight, I almost didn't answer. It was 11:04 p.m. I was brushing my teeth, half listening to an old playlist humming from the corner speaker when the phone rang. Unknown number. But something about the timing told me exactly who it was. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. I answered on the third call. Isela Rael's voice was tight, desperate. "Please don't hang up." I didn't say anything. "We're getting evicted," he rushed. "The notice is final. They're coming Monday. We thought we had more time, but his voice cracked. We don't have anywhere to go." I sat down on the edge of my bed towel, still around my neck. "Please," he said again. "You have money. Just help us cover this month. After that, we'll figure it out." A pause. Then another voice grabbed the phone. "Thomas, you think you can just walk out and leave us to drown?" His voice was full of the same fire he used when I was late with dinner or didn't fold the towels the way he liked. "We gave you a home, a roof, a family. You owe us." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the lie was so worn down it couldn't hold its shape anymore. "I bought the food," I said. "I paid the bills. That roof. It stayed up because I kept handing you my paycheck and shutting my mouth. He tried to cut in, but I kept going. You gave me silence. You gave me shame. You gave me 100 reasons to leave and not one to come back. There was a beat of stunned quiet. You're not like this, Rail whispered in the background. You've always been the one who held it together. Exactly, I said. I held it. Now you learn what happens when I let go. And then I hung up. The silence afterward didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. And 2 weeks later, when another call came, this time from Texas, I didn't recognize the number until I heard her voice. The voice was older than I remembered, slower but still sharp around the edges. Like time had softened her, but not changed her. Isola, she said. It's your mother. I didn't say anything. She sighed. I heard what happened. Thomas and Rael, they told me. How could you leave them like that? My jaw clenched. You want to know how don't get defensive? She cut in. I'm trying to understand. They're your family. No, I said. They were your family. I was the fill-in, the backup plan when you left and never came back. She went quiet for a moment. Then, with forced calm, I had to leave. You know that. I did it for us. You did it for money, I said. And maybe that was fair. But you didn't call for birthdays. You didn't come back when Rail failed 2 grades or when I got pneumonia. You didn't ask if I was okay. You asked if the bills were paid. That's not true. It is, I said. And I did everything you asked. I kept the house together. I stayed when I shouldn't have. I raised him while Dad drank, and you sent checks with no return address. And now you want to ask me why I left. She breathed in sharply. Still, you should have stayed. Those words hit harder than the silence before them. Not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. I stared at the wall in front of me. Not angry, not even sad. Just done. I'm not your replacement, I said. I was your daughter. And now I'm just done. Isola. I didn't wait for the rest. I ended the call. Then I pulled up her number, pressed down on the contact, and hit block. There was no satisfaction, no rush of power, just the quiet relief of one less weight I had to carry. Later that night, I made tea. I sat by the window with the curtain open, watching the streetlights blink on. And when I got into bed, I slept with both arms above the blankets like I didn't need to guard anything anymore. In the morning, I checked my savings account. I moved a little into my travel fund. I'd been thinking about Oregon. And exactly 1 year from the night I walked out, I would finally answer the question I'd been afraid to ask. What does a life feel like when it actually belongs to you? It's been a year. Rael works at a tire shop during the day and delivers groceries at night. Thomas drives for Uber in the mornings and naps through the afternoons. They moved to a smaller apartment near the bus depot. No backyard, no couch, no beer fridge. Just walls and rent due. I don't know this because I asked. I know it because silence doesn't stop people from posting. The updates come like little postcards. I never requested a tagged photo here, a complaint thread there. They're surviving now, not because they changed, but because they had no choice. Me, I still live in the studio over the bakery. The paint is still peeling, but the books on my shelf are mine. So are the mornings slow and soft, filled with lavender tea and sun spilling through the curtain. I added more plants. They don't talk back. They don't demand anything. They just grow when I water them. On Sundays, I walk to the farmer's market, pick out vegetables. I don't always know how to cook and eat breakfast alone without explaining why that's enough. I don't go home for holidays. I don't send updates. I don't call. Some people might say that's cold, but I think it's just accurate. Sometimes I journal, not every day. But when the silence feels big and full instead of empty, I write little truths that I never got to say out loud. Like this one, they say, peace is forgiveness. But I think it's just not having to explain yourself anymore. I reread that line last night, and I realized something. They never really loved me. They loved the version of me who gave until it hurt, who didn't say no, who filled the gaps without being asked. But I'm not that girl anymore. Now I say no. Now I leave. Now I live without shrinking. And that version of me, she's not waiting to be understood. She's waiting for the next chapter.